In today's story, Jamal Thompson, a gifted black student, faces unfair prejudice from his music teacher, who challenges him to play the piano in front of the class, expecting him to fail. But what she doesn't know is that Jamal is a piano prodigy. Watch as he defies expectations and stuns everyone with his incredible talent. Jamal Thompson sat at the back of the classroom, his gaze downcast, a familiar weight pressing on him. He knew that, no matter how hard he tried, Ms. Williams, his music teacher, would never see him as equal to his white classmates. Miss Williams had made it clear from the start that she didn't think highly of him. Her cold glares often reinforced that sentiment. Jamal could feel the subtle scorn in the way she ignored him, the way she only called on white students to answer questions, and the way she never offered him praise. But when she challenged him to play in front of the class, Jamal knew exactly what she was doing. She was setting him up to fail. She wanted to embarrass him, make him feel small. But Jamal wasn't just any piano player, he was a prodigy. Today, he was going to prove her wrong and make her regret underestimating him. As Ms. Williams began discussing the works of famous classical composers, Jamal's fingers tapped lightly on the edge of his desk, a quiet act of defiance. It was a small, almost subconscious gesture, but for Jamal, it was a way to cope with the constant tension in the classroom. He had learned long ago that no matter how talented he was, he would never be treated fairly. Ms. Williams stood at the front of the room, her sharp eyes scanning the class, searching for the next student to call on. Her appearance was always impeccable, her blonde hair tightly pulled back, her clothes crisp and pressed, pearls perfectly arranged. She carried herself with an air of authority, but there was an undeniable coldness in the way she interacted with Jamal. Jamal had learned to ignore it, to pretend it didn't bother him, but deep down it stung. Today, we'll discuss the works of some of the greatest composers, Bach, Mozart, and Beethoven, Miss Williams said. She wrote their names on the board with precise chalk strokes, then paused, casting a quick glance at Jamal. Not everyone will appreciate the complexity of classical music, she added, her gaze lingering on Jamal for just a moment. Jamal didn't flinch. He kept his head down, his fingers continuing their rhythmic tapping on the desk. The silence in the room grew thick, broken only by the faint sound of Ms. Williams's chalk against the board. Jamal had heard the subtle insults before, whispers from his classmates, snickers when the teacher made a point of criticizing him. He had learned to endure them, to hide his pain behind a mask of indifference. But today, he wasn't going to back down. Ms. Williams' voice broke the silence again, sharp and commanding. "Jamal," she called out, her gaze locking onto him. "Come up here and play something for us. Show us what you can do." There it was, the challenge, the trap. Jamal could feel the weight of the room pressing down on him. He could sense the expectation in the air, the eyes of his classmates on him, waiting for him to fail. But Jamal wasn't going to let that happen. Not today, not ever. Slowly, Jamal stood up, his legs heavy, like they were made of stone. His heart pounded in his chest, but he forced himself to keep his expression neutral. He walked to the front of the classroom, ignoring the whispers and stares, focusing only on the task at hand. The piano sat before him, its polished surface gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Jamal took a deep breath, his fingers hovering over the keys for a moment, then began to play. The notes flowed effortlessly, the melody smooth and rich, filling the room with sound. It wasn't classical music, but it was just as complex, just as beautiful. Jamal's music spoke of struggle, of hope, of life itself. It was personal, raw, and real. As his fingers danced across the keys, Jamal could feel his spirit soaring. Miss Williams' expression shifted as she watched him. The coldness in her eyes melted, replaced by something closer to surprise and frustration. She hadn't expected this. Jamal wasn't just playing notes. He was telling a story. The class fell into silence, captivated by the music. Some were moved, others uncertain how to react, but none of them could look away. When Jamal finished, the silence was thick and heavy, the kind that comes when something profound has just been said. He stood up from the piano, his heart still racing, his hands lingering on the keys. The class remained still, unsure of what to do next. Then slowly Ms. Williams spoke. "That was unexpected," she said, her voice low, almost grudging. "But don't think this means you're off the hook." Jamal turned to leave, But then, as he reached the door, Ms. Williams spoke again, her tone softer now. Jamal, she said, you've got talent, but you'll need to work harder if you want to make it. Don't waste it. Jamal paused for a moment, his mind racing. Then without a word, he walked out of the classroom. His chest swelled with pride. For the first time, he felt like he had truly won. The days that followed were a blur of emotions. Jamal couldn't get the look in Ms. Williams' eyes out of his head. It wasn't admiration, but it was something close to it. And that, for Jamal, was enough. The next day at lunch, Jamal sat with his friends trying to act casual. You totally nailed it, man, Tyler said, slapping him on the back. Jamal smiled faintly, but deep down, he was still unsure if he had really done enough to prove himself. The next class passed in a blur. Jamal tried to focus on the lesson, but all he could think about was the piano, the music, and Ms. Williams. After class, Ms. Williams approached Jamal again, her footsteps light but purposeful. I've been thinking about your performance, she said, her voice softer now. You have something special, Jamal, but talent alone won't get you far. Jamal nodded, his fingers twitching nervously. I know. I'll work harder. Ms. Williams gave him a small smile, a rare moment of warmth. Good. I expect more from you. Then she paused as if reconsidering something. You're different from the others. Don't forget that. Jamal felt a flicker of something inside him, something unfamiliar. He wasn't sure what it was, but it was enough to make him nod. As he left the classroom, his thoughts were a whirlwind of confusion and hope. He wasn't sure what to make of Ms. Williams' words, but they had planted a seed. That evening, Jamal sat at the piano again. This time he wasn't playing for anyone else. He was playing for himself. He played with abandon, his fingers moving over the keys in a fluid, effortless way. The music flowed out of him, raw and unfiltered. It was a reflection of his soul, of everything he had ever experienced. For the first time, Jamal felt like he wasn't just playing notes. He was telling a story, his story. The next day when he walked into class, something had changed. Ms. Williams noticed it immediately. You've been practicing, she said, raising an eyebrow. That's the kind of dedication I like to see. Jamal smiled confidently. I told you I would. I don't want to let you down. Ms. Williams gave him a nod of approval. Good. Keep it up. I expect great things from you, Jamal. Don't stop now. Jamal felt a rush of excitement and pressure all at once. He had never wanted to prove himself so much in his life. And yet, despite the pressure, Jamal felt ready. He wasn't doing this for anyone else anymore. He was doing it for himself. A few weeks passed, and Jamal's progress was undeniable. He wasn't just playing piano anymore. He was becoming one with the music. Ms. Williams noticed it too. One day after class, she pulled Jamal aside. You're really coming into your own, Jamal. I can see the difference. Jamal felt a sense of pride, but it was tempered with the knowledge that there was still so much more to learn. You're ready for the next challenge, she said, her voice calm but firm. I want you to enter the school's talent show. Jamal hesitated. The idea of performing in front of a large audience terrified him. I don't know, Ms. Williams. What if I mess up? The fear is part of the process, Ms. Williams replied, giving him a knowing smile. You'll never grow if you don't push yourself beyond your comfort zone. Jamal looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. Okay, I'll do it. The day of the talent show arrived faster than Jamal expected. He had been practicing day and night, but the nerves were still there. His heart raced as he stood backstage, listening to the sounds of the other performers. Some of them were incredible, and Jamal couldn't help but feel small in comparison. You've got this, Jamal, Tyler said, giving him a quick pat on the back as he passed by. Just remember, it's your time to shine. Jamal nodded, but inside he felt the weight of every eye that would soon be on him. When his name was called, Jamal took a deep breath and stepped onto the stage. The bright lights made it hard to see, but he could still feel the eyes of the audience on him. He sat at the piano, hands trembling slightly as he positioned his fingers on the keys. But as soon as he started playing, everything else faded away. The music flowed from him effortlessly, as if the piano and he were one. Each note was a release, each chord a part of him being expressed. For the first time in his life, Jamal didn't care about the audience. He wasn't playing to impress them or prove anything to anyone. He was playing for himself, for the joy of the music. When the last note echoed through the auditorium, Jamal sat still for a moment, letting the silence settle around him. The audience was quiet at first, but then they erupted into applause. Jamal stood up slowly, his heart pounding in his chest, but this time, it wasn't from fear. It was from a feeling of accomplishment. As he walked off the stage, he saw Miss Williams standing by the side, smiling at him proudly. "You did it, Jamal. I knew you could." Her words were simple, but they meant everything to him. Jamal grinned, his nerves finally easing. "Thanks, Miss Williams. I couldn't have done it without you." She chuckled softly. "No, Jamal. You did it. I just helped you believe in yourself." Jamal smiled, the feeling of pride settling deep within him. He had done it. He had stepped out of his comfort zone, and now he knew he was capable of more than he had ever imagined. As he left the auditorium, Jamal felt like a new person, ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. He wasn't just a high school student anymore. He was an artist. And this was only the beginning. In the weeks following the talent show, Jamal felt different. He had always loved music, but now it was more than just a hobby. It was his passion, his escape. He spent every free moment practicing at the piano, lost in the rhythm and melodies he created. Ms. Williams noticed the change in Jamal. She would occasionally stop by the piano room to hear him play, always offering a few words of encouragement. One day after Jamal finished playing a particularly challenging piece, she clapped her hands. "That was impressive, Jamal," she said. "You've come a long way, but don't get complacent. The journey is just beginning." Jamal smiled, feeling a sense of accomplishment, but deep down he knew Ms. Williams was right. There was still so much more to learn. One afternoon, Ms. Williams called Jamal into her office. She had a serious look on her face, something that always made Jamal nervous. "I've been thinking," she began. "There's a piano competition coming up, and I think you should enter." Jamal's eyes widened. A competition? The thought terrified him. He had never played in front of so many people before. "I know it's scary," Ms. Williams continued, "but this is your chance to challenge yourself, to see how far you can really go." Jamal hesitated. "What if I mess up?" "You won't know until you try," she said, her voice calm but firm. "And even if you do mess up, it's not the end. It's part of the learning process." Jamal nodded, though a knot of fear still twisted in his stomach. "I'll do it," he said quietly. "I'll enter the competition." In the weeks leading up to the competition, Jamal practiced with an intensity he hadn't known before. Every day he pushed himself harder, determined to be ready. Ms. Williams continued to offer guidance and encouragement, but she also pushed Jamal harder than he had ever been pushed before. One afternoon, she watched him practice a particularly difficult piece. She could see the frustration building on his face as he struggled with a complex passage. "You're getting there, Jamal," she said gently. "Take a breath. Don't let the frustration control you." Jamal closed his eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. Then he tried again, and this time the notes flowed more smoothly. Ms. Williams smiled, satisfied. "That's it. You've got it now." The day of the competition arrived, and Jamal felt both excited and terrified. The auditorium was packed, and the air was thick with anticipation. He stood backstage, looking out at the sea of faces. His heart was racing, his palms sweaty. He felt like an outsider. But then he remembered Miss Williams' words. "This is your time. Don't let fear hold you back." Jamal took a deep breath, and when his name was called, he stepped onto the stage with a sense of purpose. As his fingers touched the piano keys, all the fear melted away. The music was his, and nothing else mattered.